Hello, my name is Jameel Young, and this is my research proposal for Social Work for 5001, Dr. Ferris's class. The title of this research proposal is Access to Mental Health Care Among the Homeless. On the first slide here, we do have sort of an outline for where we're going in the presentation, introduction, just sort of the headings for some of what is upcoming, intervention strategies, the synthesis of literature, potential participants in the study, the methods that will be used, data collection, data analysis, limitations, the dissemination plan, my conclusion, and then, of course, my citations. A brief overview. In 2019, there were an estimated 567,715 homeless people living in the United States, with New York City having the highest number of people experiencing homelessness, and New Mexico showing the greatest increase between 2018 and 2019. So just over 500,000 people in the year 2019. Homelessness is caused by a multitude of factors contributing to the heterogeneity of the population itself. This heterogeneity is caused by the numerous ways that Americans can actually come to be homeless. Some of these reasons for a person to potentially become homeless are, of course, falling upon economic instability, employment issues, a pandemic like that which we're under or going through right now, enduring, evictions that can occur due to any of the things that I've just mentioned, systemic racism, and then the stigmas and biases that are associated with systemic racism, and of course mental health issues as well. According to the National Alliance to End Homelessness, the state of Virginia, my home state, had approximately 5,783 people experiencing homelessness on average in 2019. That's about 6.8 homeless people per 10,000 residents. Mental health issues within the homeless population are a major concern, as a high amount of people experiencing homelessness have mental health issues. A 2008 study, which surveyed 7 Western countries, used a meta-regression analysis that found that an estimated 12.7% of individuals who were homeless also had either psychotic illness, 11.4% had a major depression diagnosis, and 23.1% had a personality disorder. So within that homeless population, out of all the homeless people that were surveyed, these were the percentages of each individual type of mental illness. So clearly, homelessness is an issue across the country and even in my home state of Virginia. And then also, of course, there are mental health issues that homeless people need help with. And these are some of them that were listed here on this slide. There are 2 intervention strategies that many people experiencing homelessness may seek out or have offered to them, and just wanted to review a bit about them. The first is the continuum of care model, COCs separate intervention strategies into 3 categories. There's a supportive housing program, shelter plus care programs, and then moderate rehabilitation and single room occupancy programs. All 3 of these homeless assistance subcategories within the COC intervention model provide a long-term, holistic approach to mental and general health care for the homeless. This strategy also allows for funding to be spent in the specific area that people experiencing homeless need assistance with. It helps social workers and other medical professionals use funds provided by, say, the ACA, down from the federal government to the state level, and then with those block grants and at the state level, continuum of care models can actually allow for the divvying of that funding in a way that is manageable and trackable. And just kind of continuing on here with regard to COCs and homeless families, Wong, Park, and Neiman found that there was a greater amount of success with COC programs that had less individually restrictive control, more personal versus group intervention, and leadership that's based on participation and more emphasis on individual choices. So sort of a self-actualized intervention. The scaffold is there, and then people experiencing homelessness who are able to engage in the COC or acquire healthcare so that they can actually use a COC are able to have access to a holistic approach. The COC model is one that spans over time. And then there's also the therapeutic workplace model. Therapeutic workplace intervention strategy is one that takes place near, within, or after that third phase, kind of like the last phase, after rapid housing of the COC, after some general health care, mental health care, for example, has taken place. The next step would be something like a therapeutic workplace model. And of course, in the COC model, emphasis is placed on getting the person into rapid placement, temporary housing, then training for skills that will help them transition into more independent living conditions, followed by more permanent housing with access to support for mental health issues and general health care. And so things like good work performance and the reinforcement just with positive outcomes, the reinforcement of positive outcomes rather, are things that take place within that contingency-based therapeutic workplace model. People are rewarded for going to therapy sessions, for continuous periods of sobriety, things like that. In order to refine the problem of healthcare access among people experiencing homelessness down to a research question, we have to take a look at the problem as it exists. And so we're taking a look at homelessness as an issue, and then also the access that people experiencing homelessness have to mental health care. For the study, the overarching issue of healthcare for the homeless was initially pondered, followed by a focusing in aiming of the study. So the result was starting with healthcare for the homeless, then proceeding to access to healthcare among people experiencing homelessness, then proceeding on to access to mental health services among people experiencing homelessness, and finally ending up with what are the common themes and experiences among people experiencing homelessness with regard to obtaining mental health care services in the state of Virginia. Once identified, researchers must then review the types of services and intervention strategies that are currently available and see if, after the data have been collected, said data provides responses that drive toward theory or emergent themes with the experiences of the population that is or are being interviewed at the time. As the study progresses, progressive focusing may occur both in this and also future studies related to this study as themes emerge. This involves a focus and then a refocus or a refinement of the initial focus of the study as data comes in. A great deal of the literature that deals with people experiencing homelessness and their access to mental health mentions the application and expansion of Medicaid coverage. Many researchers believe that homelessness is either a health problem or a large factor that contributes to mental health issues. And as such, it's important to look at homelessness rather as both a mental health issue and one that has my apologies. It's important to look at both homelessness and mental health issues together among the homelessness as interdigitating health concerns, basically as things that can go hand in hand and affect one another. People experiencing homelessness will also receive health care services. Demonstrated extensive utilization of services for substance abuse and mental health care related needs. Findings align with previous research supporting the notion that stable housing increases access to regular care. If homeless people have access to this care, it looks like more and more use it. And if we have the ability to extend preventative care or consistent quality care for mental health services to PEH, then we also have the potential of lowering costs across the board with regard to emergency room visits. Even after mental health care has been set up or established, people experiencing homelessness still have to deal with multiple forms of discrimination, which can create barriers to continued care or problems related to the quality of care that is received. These barriers to care include discrimination due to poverty or homelessness within healthcare settings, mental illness or substance abuse, and discrimination due to race or ethnicity or skin color. The therapeutic workplace model is an example of a type of mental health care maintenance that can be accessed by the homeless. Programs like these are based on intervention methods that have a contingency management approach. I just wanted to reiterate that at this point as well, as it was part of the literature review that I did. Near the end of the COC process, access to a maintenance program like this one, which encourages bringing behavior under individual control, that self-actualization that I told you about, and self-direction as well, or at least the ability to choose and kind of finding a way within the scaffolding of the program is beneficial. And so that includes mental health issues that commingle with physical health issues like drug abuse, addiction, etc. Would be beneficial if accessible for Bigelow and Silverman. So potential participants of the study. We're looking for people experiencing homelessness, age 18 or older, any gender, or any gender identification. Participants will be interviewed in the Hampton Roads area of Virginia. That's southeastern Virginia. This includes Virginia Beach, Chesapeake, and Norfolk, Virginia. Participants must be able to understand the meaning of informed consent and provide informed consent to researchers. Theoretical sampling techniques will coincide with participant selection. Researchers will seek a minimum of 30 participants in each city, followed by a different pool of at least 30% participants once the initial interviews have been conducted. So the initial interviews will be conducted. Some time will pass, a week or two, depending on how long it takes to go to the other cities and conduct the same semi-structured interviews, and then double back, as is recommended in grounded theory and qualitative data collection, and try to find new participants within the same population. So people that we don't want to ask the same people experiencing homelessness, but we do want to see if we can find people from the same area. It's just different people for potentially different responses. Participants age 18 and older in southeastern Virginia were chosen in order to find to find emergent themes related to healthcare acquisition and service in this region. So grounded theory is the method that we're using. The study will utilize a qualitative approach to data acquisition and analysis. The goal is to explore ongoing processes, problems, or events that are related to the issues that are commonly experienced by homeless adults when they are seeking and undergoing healthcare services. Justification. Grounded theory methods will be used in order to seek theories that come from coding the responses to semi-structured interviews into categories. And that's what I'm looking for here. I'm looking for lived experiences. And so I'm using the grounded theory approach of qualitative analysis in order to do so. Theoretical sampling is a component of grounded theory. And as the theoretical framework is desired, that's what I'm looking for. This is defined by the creators of grounded theory as the process of data collection for generating theory whereby the analyst jointly collects, codes, and analyzes data and decides what data to collect next and where to find that data in order to develop the theory as it emerges. And the concept of emergent themes is one that is very important in grounded theory as well. All interviews will take place in the field and outside of local public access clinics and homeless shelters. Justification for this, of course, if the interviews are only taken from participants who are inside of a healthcare facility, then I might not really get a good idea of what it's like to pursue mental health care among the homeless. If those folks already have it or potentially have it, there's a higher chance of them already having it if I'm only doing my interviews inside of a facility. So outside of a facility, maybe surrounding area. Qualitative semi-structured interviews will be conducted in each city with the goal of reaching a minimum of 30 participants per location. And this is per location, meaning per city. Potential participants must agree to the study and sign a consent form. And this is mandatory. Demographic information will be collected at the beginning of the interview. Things like gender, age, marital status, ethnicity, length of time spent homeless, family units, meaning marital status, do they have children, etc. And then also like whether or not that family unit is together or separated. Level of education, housing status, and of course employment status as well. An audio device will be used for recording, followed by the researcher beginning to read questions and listen to and record responses. Some general prompts that will be used during the semi-structured interviews. Researchers will be asking people experiencing homelessness to describe what it has been like with regard to the process of obtaining mental health care. If it has already been obtained, what has the quality of that health care been like? What has the experience been like once that health care was acquired? And then what have been some of the difficulties that you or your family, if applicable, have endured while trying to obtain mental health care? Then, of course, we'll transcribe all of the semi-structured interviews. Data will be recorded both during the interviews and after the point of transcription, with the theoretical memory approach, seeking to find emergent themes, concepts, and ideas among the responses of the participants. This collection of ideas, transcribed, memoed, and then coded, mostly using an axial coding technique, will be performed until saturation takes place. Saturation, of course, is the repetition of the emergent themes. And so once they start to repeat themselves after being categorized, then we know that it's time to move on. Once saturation occurred, of course, data will be collected in a different location, so moving to the different city with the same number of participants until saturation occurs there as well. And then we'll just keep on moving. Key issues and emergent themes will arise during axial coding and categorization. Researchers will then sequence the coded grouped memos and arrange them so that a coherent theory is formed with regard to what is experienced and why the participants believe that those experiences came to pass, if applicable. If those connections can be made, then this is where we'll make them. Some data collection materials will include an Olympus WR111 voice recorder, a Microsoft Surface Pro 3 tablet, and various writing and note-taking accoutrements. After the data have been memoed, all of the memos will then be sorted, and a theory may emerge from the data. The steps for data collection are as follows. We'll create the semi-structured interview, pose those interview questions in a semi-structured interview environment to each participant, record and transcribe those interviews, and then memo. We're going to observe emergent themes, observe saturation, create categories and place new emergent themes and experiences into each category as appropriate, and then we'll revert back, examine the data, obtain new data from repeated interviews in the same area, use axial coding, and then create theory based on the coded data if theory emerges, and it should. While axial coding will be heavily used, constant comparative coding might be implemented in order to allow for simultaneous, selective, and open coding. Part of the coding process involves going back and taking a look at a lot of the data that has already been transcribed or recorded that came from the semi-structured interviews, and then recoding. Once categories are a bit more solid and emergent themes are being coded and beginning to saturate, then of course we'll move on. Careful analysis and consideration will be given to the relationships between each category and the emergent themes within. In vivo software will be used in order to both assist with the organization of memos and the coding process. A logic diagram will be created with that in vivo software so as to provide a visual representation of the qualitative data. And quantitative data can also be presented in a graph that will show the number of repeated, remember that concept of saturation, emergent themes in each category, and also possible relationships between responses and the demographical information of the participants. Large amounts of data can be an exhaustive undertaking if not structured properly. So this is the first of some of the limitations that this type of research and data analysis can present. Excuse me. It can also be very time consuming. We're using semi-structured interviews, but they're pretty open. The questions are designed to elicit open-ended responses. And so that's what we're looking for so that we can get as many emerging themes as possible. Don't want to guide them into, or guide participants rather, into particular types of answers. But at the same time, in doing so, that can lead to very long responses. The more data, the better, of course, but still, it is a factor, and so I want to make sure that I address it as a limitation. Time-consuming responses. I say that, I mentioned that they may need to be limited, but of course, it's not something that I would recommend doing. We want as much information as possible, and it will take the time that it takes, but we can perhaps make sure that all of our questions are well refined so as to elicit responses that are specific. Causality is difficult to determine outside of making assumptions based on the repetition of emergent themes. Preconceived ideas about the general idea of the study must be ignored or avoided, as bias can influence the creation of categories if researchers aren't careful. Obviously, researchers or at least the creators of the study, the creator of the study or the proposal here, has some preconceived notions, whether it be based on the lean of some of the literature that I've reviewed, or something else, that I might know or I may have experienced in my own life, can impact coding and the creation of categories, and then how those emergent themes are categorized. And so, one has to be careful of this. And then, of course, saturation is determined by the researcher, and as such, the researcher might stop interviewing participants too soon. So we need to set a guideline and make sure that we're following that. And so after repetition of, say, 5 of the same emergent themes, then we know that we can move on within each category, right? And so I don't just mean 5 in a city, but within each category during Benway encoding. And then, of course, all of that can bring us back to, the very beginning, which is large amounts of data. We're going to have quite a bit because it's open-ended. The purpose of this study, with regard to the dissemination plan, the purpose of the study is to explore the common themes and disparities between people experiencing homelessness as they attempt to obtain mental health care services and discuss common and differing experiences leading to a theory. So where would that go? Where would that information go, and who would it help? This information would be really helpful to federal healthcare policymakers. A lot of them have only quantitative data, and much of my literary review saw a lot of quantitative data, but not a lot of qualitative, not a lot of lived experiences from the perspective of the homeless upward or outward, right? I think it would be beneficial for federal and state healthcare policymakers, who are the ones that not only create policy, but also, especially at the state level, and since the Affordable Care Act, are the ones who decide how a lot of that state level funding will be distributed. So very important. In my own state, here in Virginia, the Department of Medical Assistance Services is a department that I would very much want to have access to this information, this data from this type of study. Of course, clinical staff members, medical staff members, people who are offering services to people experiencing homelessness could benefit from this as well. Researchers and data analysts who report to any of the aforementioned, and then of course homeless housing specialists as well. Application of these results, or of the results of this study, could provide insight into and theory with regard to the actual lived experiences of people experiencing homelessness when trying to obtain quality mental health care. Instead of applying funding to numbers alone based on, say, a census, need could be assessed based on experiences. In conclusion, this study seeks experiences that are grounded in data. As such, the grounded theory method is used so that the many different lived experiences of people experiencing homelessness as they attempt to acquire and or maintain mental health care can be analyzed. Multiple intervention strategies are available to people experiencing homelessness, but the purpose of this study is to generate theory based on the lived experiences of PEH who are either seeking or are currently obtaining the interventions mentioned, or many others. By finding emergent theories based on the lived experiences of the population that we're attempting to provide aid for, researchers can obtain a grounded experience-driven data pool. This data can then be analyzed using the mentioned grounded theory methods. This data and the theory that is the fruit of said analysis can provide a bottom-up instead of top-down approach to answering the question of what is needed to help this very vulnerable population with regard to obtaining mental health care. My references are listed here, and those are available for your review at any time, of course. And last but not least, Dr. Ferris, I want to thank you very much for your time and also for everything that you taught me and all of us this session. I have a lot to build on, and I'll be working with a pretty strong foundation for what is possible within the realm of research and social work, and the field of social work. And so I'll be working with a lot of the things that I've learned from you through the course, throughout my entire career, I believe. But I just really wanted to say thank you. Thank you for the time that you put into this and all of us. Really appreciate it.